Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Medina. I'm lead attorney at Farmer Law PC. And today we'll be covering a crucial document that every employer working with TN and any other type of non-immigrant visas must understand and keep track of, the I-94 arrival departure record. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be equipped and have all the pertinent information to spot any compliance issues or risks early on and prevent any gaps in work authorization for your employees. We'll start with a short introduction, and then we'll learn how to identify the different documents that are involved in ensuring compliance, such as the I-94 visa stamp and the I-797 notice of action. We'll also share some special scenarios that employers frequently face, show you how to handle I-94 errors, and finally wrap it up with best practices. And as I mentioned before, we're looking forward to your questions at the end. Again, my name is Deborah Medina. I'm the lead attorney at Farmer Law PC. I've been practicing business immigration for over a decade, specializing in H-1B and TN visas, mostly in other non-immigrant visas. And I'm originally from Argentina, native Spanish speaker. And most recently, I was selected as Rising Star by Reuters Super Lawyers for 2024 and 2025. So I-94 introduction and why it matters. So why is the I-94 so important, especially for TN and H2 employers? Simply put, the I-94 controls how long a worker is allowed to legally stay in the U.S. to work. This is often misunderstood, and people tend to look at the visa stamp rather than the I-94 to try to determine how long an employee is allowed to stay in the U.S. But it's important to know that it's the I-94 record, the arrival departure record, that controls the employee's authorized stay in the U.S. and work authorization. For example, if an employee's I-94 is accidentally shortened at the border, they could fall out of status without realizing it, especially if they're only looking at their valid visa stamp. And obviously, this can lead to serious legal consequences and potentially gaps in work authorization. So what is the I-94 record? It's essentially an official record issued by CBP, Custom and Border Protection, or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. The document clearly will state the date of entry, the visa category, and the expiration date of that authorized stay under that visa category. And this record is available generally online for entries by sea or air. And sometimes we'll see it for entries by land, but it's not always issued. And that's a concern that we have with a lot of, especially Mexican nationals who enter the U.S. by land, and CBP will not always issue an updated I-94. So it's always key to let your employees know to always check their I-94 record before they leave the port of entry by land. Just to go over some relevant documents, again, the visa stamp. So again, the visa stamp is only a travel document that authorizes the holder of the visa stamp to travel to the U.S. It does not guarantee an entry. It's always at CBP's discretion. Obviously, there's usually no issues with a holder of a non-immigrant visa entering the U.S. unless there's some major red flags. But it essentially, the visa stamp specifies the length of time that the holder is permitted to enter the U.S. But it does not determine how long they can stay in the U.S. That's determined by the visa category. The visa can be issued for months or years, depending on the type. I-797A, or notice of action. This is something that most of the employers should recognize if they file an extension or change of employer or change of status for their employees. It's issued by USCIS when a worker gets an extension or changes their status while they're inside the US. And generally, it will come with a new I-94 entry departure record at the bottom of the notice, and that I-94 becomes the official record of the employee's stay. So even if the worker hasn't left the U.S., the new I-94 on the I-797A is valid. So we're essentially extending the previous I-94 that was issued by CBP with USCIS. So you will notice that the I-94 that's attached to the I-797A will have the same record number as the last I-94 that was issued by CBP. So again, the visa stamp versus I-94. And this is, again, a very important key compliance point. The visa stamp allows the employee to travel to the U.S., but the I-94 that's issued after they enter the U.S. is what controls not only the legal stay, but the work authorization for those non-immigrant visas. So a person can have an expired visa, but remain legally in the U.S. as long as their I-94 is valid. So for employees, most importantly, you must track the I-94 expiration date, not the visa. And many employers make this mistake, thinking a visa's expiration date equals the end of stay, and that's not correct. So a common I-94 scenario we have seen at Farmer Law PC is, for example, a TN visa that is valid until July 1st, 2027. And by TN visa, we mean either their I-797A or their I-94 that's valid until July 1st, 2027. The person travels outside the U.S. with a passport that expires July 2nd, 2025. Once they re-enter, CBP will shorten the new I-94 to match that expiration date on their passport. So now the worker must renew their passport and exit and re-enter the U.S. in order to receive a new I-94 with the full 3-year validity. And this is focusing on TNs. Once the TN travels again with a new passport, CBP will typically issue an I-94 that reflects the full 3-year stay from the original entry date. Another option, if they don't have any travel plans, or and if there's sufficient time before the new I-94 expires, is to renew the passport, file for an extension with USCIS, which generally takes 3 to 5 months, and extra costs apply. One thing to note, however, is if a case with USCIS is filed and the employee decides to travel and leave the U.S., while the case is pending with USCIS, the case will be considered as abandoned. So it's important to keep track of an employee's passport expiration dates to ensure there are no issues once they have travel plans. So if a passport is renewed inside the U.S., CBP cannot update an I-94 without a border crossing. And correction requests are generally not possible unless CBP physically inspects the new passport at the port of entry. So again, the options are either travel outside and re-enter with a new passport, or file an extension of status with USCIS, which, as I mentioned before, it's going to take a few months and additional costs will apply. Now, between the two agencies, USCIS and CBP, USCIS may grant a full 3-year extension with an I-797A, even if the passport expires sooner. This does not mean that we can file an extension with an already expired passport. So the passport must always be valid. However, during the next CBP entry, CBP will review the passport validity and may issue a shorter I-94, regardless of what the I-797A says. And this is something we've seen with some employers facing this issue where they're only looking at the I-797A and the employee has exited the U.S. since that I-797A has been issued and the new I-94 has been shortened. So it's always very important to always look at the most recent I-94. Passport expiration does not affect USCIS approval, but it does affect the employee's I-94 at reentry with CBP. And accessing the I-94 is a fairly simple process. It's available online, usually within minutes of the employee's reentry to the US, and can be downloaded, again, right away, right after entry to the US. Make sure you're matching the information with the passport and the visa. Sometimes the website can be a little tricky, and if the employee has several names or several last names, sometimes it takes a few tries with the combination of names before we can get the I-94. And after any USCIS process, the I-94 online is not going to update. That's very important to note. The online I-94 only updates after a reentry through CBP. If there's been an I-797A that's been issued since the last entry, the I-94 at the bottom of the I-797A issued by USCIS is what controls. So some special considerations for TN visa workers and H-2 workers. For TN, the TN status usually allows a stay of up to 3 years, and extensions can be filed with USCIS or by traveling and getting a new I-94 upon reentry. But again, it's always very important to always verify the I-94 after each reentry into the US. For instance, keep track of any PTO or vacation requests and make a note of that date when they plan to come back to work, and make sure to remind employees to verify their online I-94 record. For H-2A and H-2B workers, the I-94 expiration date will usually align with the end of the certification. USCIS likes to add a 10-day sort of grace period to I-94s. So sometimes you'll see an I-94 that it's a little bit longer than the certification, but that's just to allow the employee time to get their orders, their everything in order before they leave the US. But again, timely departure is crucial to avoid future visa issues for both the TN and H-2s, and employers must ensure workers do not overstay their authorized stay. And of course, I-94 errors will happen, as many employers know this, not only because of expired passports, but also because of CBP clerical mistakes and errors. So for all visa types, the risk of ignoring the I-94 can be major. For example, non-compliance with immigration laws, risk of fines, audits, and program bans, especially for the H-2 program, disruption in workforce. If there's an employee whose I-94 has expired, they must cease employment as soon as possible. They cannot continue working after their I-94 has expired. Not only that, but the employee can begin to accrue unlawful status in the US, which will affect future applications, not only with USCIS, but future visa applications at the consulate. And they could even trigger 3 or 10-year bar for entering the US. The process to correct an I-94 can be straightforward depending on the reason, but again, errors happen, and often due to the passport expiration or sometimes CBP clerical mistakes. So again, it's always very, very important for not only you, but the employees to know to check the I-94 after every reentry. If you notice an error, or if the employee notices an error after their most recent reentry, they can go to the nearest CBP port or the for inspection office. The information is available online, or please reach out to us and we can contact CBP directly to request corrections, which is a major advantage. And we've been able to get pretty fast resolutions with an attorney reaching out to CBP. Best practices for employers. Stay proactive. Again, keep track of those PTO vacation days. If they're planning to travel outside of the country, request I-94 copies upon every employee arrival. Track and set reminders for expiration dates. Train your HR team to notice these issues with the I-94, and always keep your employees informed about the importance of reviewing their I-94, and always check expiration dates, passport validity, and the most recent I-94, especially after travel. And always, if in doubt, feel free to contact us at Farmer Law PC, and we can assist with either corrections, extensions, or clarify any questions you may have. And that's all for me. If you have any questions, again, we have the Q&A option available, and we can answer your questions. Jennifer, I see you have raised your hand, but we don't have the microphone option open for participants. I'm not seeing any questions in the QA. I don't know if it's from my end. Omar, are you able to see any questions?
No, not yet. Let me check if I can allowed access to the microphone to Jennifer, so she can ask the question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see the question now. Would we be able to get a copy of this presentation? Omar, are we sharing the presentation to everyone that attended today?
Yes, of course. We will send it through the email.
Okay.
I think Roman also has a question. Roman, I don't know if you would like to use the Q&A resource in the chat while we figure out how to unmute you.
Another question from Jennifer. We have had tech be canceled before at the port of entry, and it's because of the I-94. Can we ask questions about cases when they happen? Yes, absolutely. You can always reach out to us with any questions regarding re-entry, any issues with CBP, either land or at the airport, and we'll be happy to help. We have our contact information on the screen right now. If you're already working with one of the attorneys or one of the paralegals here with Farmer Law PC, you can also contact them directly. From Sarah, thank you. I always learn something new from these webinars today was the importance of monitoring the I-94. Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. We're so happy that you found this helpful. I know this is a big topic for a lot of employers and the difference between the I-94 and visa stamp, especially with this new administration. We're seeing an uptick in issues with the I-94 and potential issues for reentry with CBP. From Ryan, the CBP have discretion on those date changes. I've seen the passport example you mentioned, but also seen time added and lost. It all feels very random. Absolutely. So again, it's at the CBP officer's discretion on how they want to handle a passport that's coming up to expire. Sometimes they'll give us, or they'll give the employee a little bit of time extra after the expiration date of their passport, just to give them time to renew their passport and either file an extension or travel again. But again, it's all at CBP's officer's discretion. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee, there's no written rule on how they manage these situations. So that's why it's always very important to always keep track of those I-94 expiration dates, just because we don't know how the CBP officer is going to address a situation like this. Is there a CBP port we should avoid due to disgruntled officers? I haven't heard of any specific issues with specific ports of entry from Mexico. There are a few if they're crossing by land in from Canada. I can recall right now there's a few, I believe it's Pearson. Usually they're a little bit tougher for TNs, but otherwise, if all the documentation is in order, especially for TNs and H2s where it's pretty straightforward, we haven't heard any issues. I would say flying is best in the sense that it guarantees an updated I-94. We have seen issues with land crossings where an I-94 is not issued, or especially for H2s for land crossing, they're not really updating the I-94 record to show the exit from the US, which I know is very important for compliance for the H2s. So I would say flying is best. Obviously, that's not always an option. So it's important to, if they're doing land crossing, to make sure they're checking their I-94 before they're too far away from the CBP land crossing. So if there's any issues, they can always go back and ask to speak to somebody to make sure the I-94 is updated. You are very welcome, Jennifer. I'm happy that this was helpful. If there are any other questions, otherwise you can always reach us by email. Our contact information is on the screen. And again, if you're already working with one of the attorneys or paralegals, feel free to contact them directly with any questions. Thank you, everyone.